A young mother is kidnapped from her own home in broad daylight. Hours later, she manages to secretly call 911 while trapped inside her abductor's car. For 6 agonizing minutes, dispatchers listen as she begs for her life. Multiple witnesses see her. Multiple people call police. Yet somehow, the rescue never comes. What happened that day would shock an entire nation, change emergency dispatch laws forever, and leave behind one of the most haunting 911 recordings ever captured.
My name is Denise. I'm your beautiful husband, and I just want to see my kids again.
January 17th, 2008 began like any other day in the quiet city of Northport, Florida. Nothing about that Thursday suggested it would become one of the most infamous criminal cases in the state's history. 21-year-old Denise Amber Lee was at home caring for her 2 young sons. To everyone who knew her, Denise was the center of her family. She was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and the kind of person who always put others before herself. Her husband, Nathan Lee, was working throughout the day, spending much of his time on the phone with her between stops. The couple talked frequently, discussing ordinary family matters and plans for the evening. It was the kind of conversation millions of couples have every day, but neither of them knew they were speaking for the last time. At some point that afternoon, Denise was alone with her children inside the family home. What happened next would never be witnessed directly by another person. Investigators would later believe that a stranger entered Denise's life completely at random. There had been no threats, no stalking reports, no known enemies, no warning. Somehow, a predator crossed paths with a young mother who had absolutely no reason to fear for her safety. The attack happened quickly. The details that would later emerge painted a horrifying picture. Denise was taken from her home while her children remained inside. The abductor left behind nearly everything. Her personal belongings remained at the house. Her phone was there. Her money was there. Her credit cards were there. The only thing missing was Denise. Hours later, Nathan returned home. As he drove, he tried calling his wife. No answer. At first, he wasn't alarmed. Parents caring for small children often become distracted. A missed phone call wasn't unusual. But as he approached the house, something felt wrong. The feeling was impossible to explain. Sometimes people describe it as instinct. Sometimes they call it intuition. Whatever it was, Nathan felt it the moment he arrived. Inside the home, his children were there. Denise was not. The situation made no sense. There was no note, no explanation, no indication of where she might have gone. The children had been left behind. The house appeared normal, yet Denise had seemingly vanished. Panic began replacing confusion. Nathan searched frantically, room after room, outside the house, around the property. Anywhere she might have gone, nothing. As the terrifying reality settled in, he contacted emergency services.
Northport Emergency?
Yes, I'm at Latour Avenue. I just got home from work, and my wife, I can't find her. My kids were in the house, and I don't know where she is. I've looked every single place, and I don't know.
How old are your kids, sir?
My oldest is 2, and my youngest is 6 months. You know what? I know. I don't know where Mommy is.
Her vehicle's in the driveway?
Yes.
Does she have any medical conditions?
No. Her purse is here. I don't. Her cell phone is here. I don't know.
Okay, what is her name?
Denise.
His voice reflected the fear of a husband trying desperately to make sense of the impossible. His wife was missing. His children had been left alone, and no one knew where she was. The call marked the beginning of a race against time. Law enforcement quickly recognized that this wasn't a typical missing person report. The circumstances were deeply suspicious. Every minute mattered. As officers began gathering information, family members were notified. Among them was Denise's father, a veteran law enforcement officer himself. The moment he learned his daughter was missing, he understood the stakes. Years of experience had taught him a painful truth. The first few hours after an abduction are often the most important. If Denise had been taken, every second that passed reduced the chances of finding her safely. Search efforts rapidly expanded. Officers interviewed neighbors. Friends were contacted. Potential witnesses were sought. Then investigators received information that immediately caught their attention. A neighbor reported seeing an unfamiliar Camaro parked near Denise's home earlier that day. The vehicle stood out because its driver had remained there for an unusual amount of time. At first glance, it might have seemed insignificant, but in missing person investigations, seemingly insignificant details often become critical clues. The description was relayed to law enforcement agencies. Officers now had something tangible to search for: a vehicle, a possible suspect, a potential lead. The hunt intensified. But while police were searching, Denise was still alive, and she was desperately fighting to survive. At some point after her abduction, Denise managed to gain access to a phone. Exactly how she did it remains one of the most remarkable aspects of the case. She was trapped, unsure whether she would ever see her family again. Yet somehow she found an opportunity, and she used it. She dialed 911. What followed would become one of the most heartbreaking emergency calls ever recorded. The call did not begin with a clear explanation. It began with confusion, noise, fragments of conversation, the sounds of a moving vehicle. Dispatchers struggled to understand what was happening, but gradually, a horrifying picture emerged. The woman on the line was in distress. She was frightened, and she was speaking as if she might never return home.
I'm
911.
sorry, I just want to go.
Hello?
I'm sorry, I just want to see my family.
Hello?
Please let me go. Please let me go. I just want to see my family again.
What's your name, ma'am?
Please, my name is Denise. I married your beautiful husband, and I just want to see my kids again. Please, I just want to see my family again. Let me go.
Do you know this guy that's with you?
No.
You don't know him from anywhere?
No, please. Oh, God, help me.
What is the address that you're at?
Where are we going? I gotta go up and around now. Up and around where? Wow, did you see that? That's the 4 streets, 5 streets over from your house. I couldn't shop everywhere. I'm sorry, please let me go. Well, no problem. I gotta go to the next street to the head. I'm sorry, please let me go.
Hello?
Please let me go, God, please. Can you take me home? On the trail, please.
Denise desperately tried to communicate information while remaining in the presence of her abductor. Every word mattered, every second mattered. But she faced an impossible challenge. She didn't know exactly where she was. She was being transported through unfamiliar areas. Roads passed by, landmarks blurred together, directions changed. The opportunity to call for help had appeared suddenly, and it could disappear at any moment. The dispatcher attempted to gather information. Questions were asked. Locations were requested. Details were sought. Yet Denise could provide only fragments. She was trying to survive while under the control of a violent criminal. At several points during the call, her fear became unmistakable. She spoke about her husband. She spoke about her children. She pleaded for another chance to see them. Listening to the recording today is deeply unsettling. Not because of screaming, not because of graphic violence, but because listeners can hear something else. Hope. A young mother desperately hoping that someone would find her before it was too late. For 6 minutes, that hope remained alive. 6 minutes during which the possibility of rescue still existed. 6 minutes during which Denise fought for every opportunity to leave clues behind. Investigators would later examine every second of that recording, every background sound, every spoken word, every possible indicator of location. But at the time, events were unfolding in real time, and time was running out. Eventually, the abductor realized what was happening. He discovered the call. The phone was taken away. The connection ended. Just like that, Denise's lifeline to the outside world was gone. No one listening knew exactly where she was. No one knew where the vehicle was heading. But one fact was undeniable. Denise Amber Lee was alive when that call was made, and she wanted desperately to return home. As search teams continued working, another development was unfolding miles away. People who had never met Denise were about to become crucial witnesses. Ordinary citizens were noticing something strange, something alarming, something that would convince them to pick up their own phones and call 911. Unknown to them, they were witnessing pieces of a crime that was still in progress. And some of those sightings would place Denise agonizingly close to rescue. Yet the full significance of those reports would not become clear until later. For now, investigators were still trying to locate a moving target, a woman in danger, and a clock that seemed to be moving faster with every passing minute. The nightmare was far from over. In fact, the most devastating failures of the entire case were still ahead. As darkness slowly approached Northport, the search for Denise Amber Lee became increasingly urgent. Investigators now knew something they hadn't known earlier in the day. Denise wasn't simply missing, she had been abducted. The terrifying 911 call had confirmed it. Somewhere on the roads of Southwest Florida, a violent predator was transporting a young mother who was desperately trying to stay alive. Every patrol car in the area was working with limited information. Every officer was searching for clues, and every passing minute reduced the chances of a successful rescue. Then another call came into 911. This time it wasn't Denise. It was a witness. A young woman reported something deeply disturbing involving a relative and an unfamiliar woman inside a vehicle. The situation had unfolded so quickly that she barely had time to process what she had seen. According to her account, a man had arrived at a family property to borrow a shovel and other equipment. While he was there, a woman inside the vehicle attempted to escape. She screamed for help. Then, just as quickly, the man forced her back into the car. The witness immediately sensed that something was terribly wrong. The call provided investigators with another crucial lead, but the horrifying reality was that Denise was still with her abductor. Still alive. Still waiting for someone to reach her. Minutes later, another witness encountered a scene that would become one of the most controversial moments in the entire case. A motorist stopped at a traffic light noticed a Camaro nearby. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then she heard screaming, not ordinary shouting. The kind of desperate screams that instantly trigger alarm. She looked toward the vehicle and saw a woman inside. The woman appeared frantic. At one point, she was reportedly striking the window and trying to attract attention. The witness immediately called 911. As she remained on the line, she described the vehicle, the direction it was traveling, and what she was witnessing in real time. The Camaro continued moving through traffic. The witness attempted to keep it in sight. She followed as long as she could. At one point, she asked the dispatcher a critical question. Should she continue following the vehicle? The answer was not as clear as it needed to be. Meanwhile, traffic conditions made it increasingly difficult to maintain visual contact. Eventually, the Camaro disappeared. The witness lost sight of it. The opportunity was gone. Looking back, this moment remains one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the entire case. Because unknown to the witness, she may have been one of the last people to see Denise Amber Lee alive. Even more devastating, investigators would later learn that the information from this call was not properly relayed through the system. The report never reached officers actively searching for Denise. At the time, no one realized the significance of that failure, but eventually, it would become a central issue in the aftermath of the case. As law enforcement continued piecing together witness reports, attention increasingly focused on a man named Michael Lee King. The evidence was beginning to point in one direction. King was a 37-year-old man experiencing significant personal and financial difficulties. Investigators would later determine that he had crossed paths with Denise completely at random. There was no known connection between them. No prior relationship, no personal dispute, nothing that explained why Denise had been targeted. The randomness made the crime even more terrifying. Once investigators identified King as a suspect, officers moved quickly. They traveled to his residence. What they found inside intensified their fears. The house appeared largely vacant, but investigators discovered evidence suggesting that a violent crime had occurred there. Every indication pointed toward Denise having been held inside the property. The search now became a race against time unlike anything investigators had faced earlier that day. If Denise was still alive, finding her quickly was the only thing that mattered. Then came a breakthrough. A Florida state trooper spotted a vehicle matching the description that had been broadcast to law enforcement agencies. The Camaro had finally been located. The trooper initiated a stop. After hours of searching, police finally had Michael Lee King in custody. But there was one devastating problem. Denise wasn't in the vehicle. Officers searched. They looked inside. They examined the area. There was no sign of her, only King, a muddy shovel, and a growing sense of dread. Investigators immediately began questioning him. Where was Denise? Was she alive? Could she still be rescued? King refused to provide meaningful answers. As precious hours slipped away, search teams spread across the surrounding area. Roads, fields, wooded locations. Every possible location was examined. Throughout the night, family members waited desperately for news. They held on to hope because they had to. After all, Denise had been alive during that 911 call. She had been speaking, believing that help was coming. But as the search entered its next phase, a horrifying possibility began creeping into everyone's minds. What if the opportunity to save her had already passed? For the next 2 days, search teams combed through southwest Florida, looking for any sign of Denise Amber Lee. Officers searched relentlessly. Volunteers joined the effort. Family members refused to give up hope. Every lead was pursued. Every possible location was examined. But with each passing hour, optimism became harder to maintain. Then came the news everyone feared. Denise was found in a shallow area less than half a mile from where Michael Lee King had been arrested. She had been murdered. The discovery ended the search, but it marked the beginning of a different fight, a fight for justice, accountability, and answers. As investigators continued building their case, the full horror of what Denise had endured began to emerge. Evidence showed that after abducting her from her home, King had held her captive and subjected her to horrific abuse before ultimately taking her life. The crime shocked Florida, but what truly ignited public outrage were the questions surrounding the emergency response. How had Denise managed to call 911 and still not be rescued? How had multiple witnesses reported seeing a woman in distress, yet the suspect remained free for hours? And perhaps most disturbing of all, could Denise have been saved? The answers would surface during the investigation. One of the witnesses who had reported the Camaro came forward and provided a formal statement. When investigators reviewed her information, they made a stunning discovery. The details from her call had never been properly passed along to officers searching for Denise. The report had effectively disappeared within the system. Even more troubling, law enforcement later determined that patrol units had been operating close enough to potentially intercept the suspect vehicle had the information been relayed correctly. No one could say with certainty that Denise would have survived, but the possibility that she might have been rescued haunted everyone involved. The case quickly became a symbol of the consequences that communication failures can have during life or death emergencies. In August 2009, Michael Lee King's trial began. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence linking him to the kidnapping, assault, and murder of Denise Amber Lee. Witness testimony, physical evidence, and King's own actions after the crime painted a devastating picture for the jury. The trial lasted weeks, but the jury needed only a short time to reach its decision. Michael Lee King was found guilty on all major charges. On September 4, 2009, he was sentenced to death. For Denise's family, the verdict brought justice, but not peace. Nothing could restore the future that had been stolen from a 21-year-old mother. Nothing could return a wife to her husband or a mother to her children. Yet Denise's story did not end in that courtroom. Determined that no family should experience the same failures, Nathan Lee and Denise's loved ones began advocating for reform. Their efforts eventually led to the passage of the Denise Amber Lee Act, which strengthened and standardized training requirements for emergency dispatchers across Florida. What began as an unimaginable tragedy became a catalyst for change. Years later, in March 2026, Michael Lee King was executed in Florida, bringing a legal conclusion to a case that had lasted nearly 2 decades. But Denise Amber Lee's legacy was never about her killer. It was about a young mother who fought until the very end, a woman who never stopped trying to get back to her husband and children, and a 6-minute 911 call that continues to remind the world how critical every second can be when someone's life hangs in the balance. Nearly 20 years later, her voice is still heard, and her story is still impossible to forget.